Well, hello once again to the Righteous Leadership Podcast. I am telling you, we are in for a treat today. Today, our guest is Ted Esler. Ted is the president of Missio Nexus. I'm going to have Ted introduce himself in a second. Ted, a matter of fact, let's do it right now. Ted, why don't you just go ahead and just introduce yourself to our audience in your own way. Ted Esler, president of Missio Nexus. Ted?
All right. Well, thanks for having me on today. So I lead an organization, it's actually an association called Missio Nexus. Mm-hmm. It is the association of mission agencies and globally focused churches in the U.S. and Canada. We just did a little research project and we added up all of the people that are staff members of our member mission agencies and ministries, and it's 58,000 people.
Wow.
So it's got kind of a wide spread of people involved, but our mission is very simple. It's to catalyze relationships, ideas, and collaboration in the Great Commission community. And we do that through a whole wide array of various things. I live in Orlando, Florida. I was a member of a mission called Pioneers for many years before I took on this role. I was a field missionary in Bosnia during the decade of the 90s, which of course were all the war years. Mm-hmm. And before that, I was a computer consultant and married. We have 5 adult kids. So that's who I am.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Ted. Ted, as you know, at the Righteous Leadership Podcast, I never really know what the second and a third, fourth, fifth question is, but I do know what the first question is. I ask every one of my guests the very same question. When you hear the term righteous leadership in your own context, share with our audience, what does that mean to you?
Well, for me, when I hear the term righteous leadership, I think of character of the leader. Boy, especially in this day and age when we've seen so many Christian leaders fail. Now, I happen to live here in Orlando, and Orlando has had, in the last 10 years, probably 4 or 5 very major leadership failures, particularly in larger churches. And it just, when I hear the term righteous leadership, I just think of the need for us as leaders to really focus on character, righteous living, just doing what we can to get close to the Lord, not once in a while, but every day. So that's what I think.
Wow. And for those that are following this podcast, that are listening to the podcast right now, that are listening to the video podcast, you can see on the screen, it's the cover page of Ted's upcoming book, and it's entitled The Innovation Crisis, Creating Disruption, Influence in the Midst, in the ministry you lead. So, Ted, share with our audience not only the concept of the book, but how does this book relate to our topic today of righteous leadership, the innovation crisis? Sure. Is there a tie?
Yeah, there's a big tie, I'd say. So the book, The Innovation Crisis, really came out of conversations that I had with various leaders who were asking me to give them examples of innovation in leadership, ministry leadership. Now, I think many of us can see that we live in an innovation age where there's a lot of innovation happening, particularly in the tech sector. But if you look back at history and you look at the founder of our faith, Jesus, you're going to see lots and lots of innovation. In fact, Jesus' ministry introduced so many innovative ideas that at times his disciples would just say, "Why do you say these things?" They were very unexpected things that Jesus would say and suggest. And again, throughout history, the church has, in many eras, been at the forefront of introducing innovation. But today, I wouldn't say that's the case. And I think many of us struggle to see innovation happen in our ministries, in our churches. Even if you're running a kingdom business, a business that you want to have you want to have a kingdom influence in, I think what you find is that innovation is elusive and hard, to the point where I think it's at a crisis point. And so the title of the book, The Innovation Crisis, is to help leaders think about why they may not be innovating. And most of the book is actually positive. It's about how we can innovate. But I use the innovation crisis as kind of the key idea to introduce the need for innovation in leadership today.
Wow. You know, just yesterday, this is amazing. Just yesterday, I was listening to the CEO of a company in Silicon Valley, and he talked about how innovation and technology has played such a key role in how we operate, how we operationalize our different systems. But he said, these are his words, these are not my words. He said, where we have failed is the application of innovation as it relates to the humanization of business, the character of business. Can you unpack that some more, Ted? And it's just amazing that we're having this conversation. And just yesterday, I was wowed on looking at this interview with the CEO in Silicon Valley, talking about where we have failed in terms of the application of innovation as it relates to human character. Talk to me a little more about that.
Well, again, you know, I think Jesus gives us incredible resources when it comes to thinking about innovation. You know, he introduced the new covenant. He said, a new commandment I give you. And actually that commandment is embedded in the Old Testament, but he brings it out. The way he reframes when he's challenged to summarize the whole law, and he reframes it down to, you know, 2 items. The whole metaphor of new wineskins, just over and over and over. The whole renewal, the idea of renewal in the New Testament. These are all examples from the scriptures of our need to see renewal, creation, recreation as a part of who we are and what we do. And, you know, to me, this kind of really came out when COVID happened. And all of a sudden, churches are told you can't meet in person.
Right.
I was thinking, hey, we're going to see all sorts of incredible innovation in the church. I don't think we got that so much. What we got from most churches is they took what they were already doing on a Sunday morning and they just put a video camera in front of it and captured the same thing with no people in the audience. Now, here we were at a moment where very different forms of teaching and the collective resources of the World Wide Web and the internet could have been pulled in. But most of us just put what we were doing already traditionally onto video. Now that there's a little bit of a pivot there, but you know, virtualizing teaching is not super innovative. I mean, I spoke at a conference in Australia virtually from Sarajevo in 1996, that many years ago. So that's really not something new. When I saw that happen, I really thought, you know, we need to be thinking about how we serve people. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a business or if it's a ministry, but we got to be thinking about not just gadgets and apps, but the whole way that we think about serving and loving each other in the kingdom in whole new innovative ways.
Wow.
And I do think that CEO is right. I think we're leaving a lot on the table when it comes to thinking about innovative ways to love people, to serve people, and to really get more in the non-tech areas of innovation.
Well, Ted, prior to this podcast, I never equated this scripture that I'm about to share in the context of innovation. But didn't Jesus say, greater things shall you do?
Absolutely.
Because I go to the Father. And I'm like, duh. That was an like opening the doorway to innovation. Talk to me, is there a connect with that scripture that I just shared?
I think so. And I think we don't see there is, in part because many of us that work, especially in the non-business sector, we feel that our hands are tied because we lack resources. So we hear about these huge companies that have billions and billions, in some cases trillions of dollars. And we think to ourselves, well, it's easy for them to innovate. But let me just say that, the innovation does not require billions and trillions of dollars. It requires imagination. It requires creativity. It requires us to see the world through a different set of eyes than the eyes that we've just kind of fallen into seeing the world through. And, when you talk about greater things, again, Jesus, he launched a literal revolution, a spiritual revolution. And I don't think he did it, because he had vast treasure stores of money to spend on that revolution, nor did he even have the people resources that we have today in what I call the ecosystem, the broader church. He launched a revolution really of spiritually infused ideas, and that's where we need to head as well.
So I love that term that you just used, ecosystem. I'm going to get to that in a second, but before I get ahead of myself, Ted, can you give us not the Webster, not the dictionary.com, but the Ted Esler's definition of innovation? Can we can we get something that in layman's terms so that our entire audience are able to pivot from here before we get to that next term, ecosystem, that you just shared?
So when I talk about innovation, what I'm talking about is the creation of something new. And sometimes that creation is invention. So when we think about innovation, it's a little bit different than invention. So Edison invented things. He came up with brand new things that weren't in existence before. That's the way we think about invention. The other part of innovation, though, isn't simply something completely new. It's the mixing of existing elements to create something new. And I think that actually that latter piece, the mixing of elements that are out there now to create something new, is probably the most common form of innovation that we see. In business literature, they talk a lot about Henry Ford and how he was an innovator, not an inventor. What they mean by that is that, he didn't invent the car. He didn't invent the assembly line. But what he did is he took those elements that were already out there and he recombined them into something completely new and creative. And so when we think about innovating, I think what we need to do is it's not just invention, although it includes invention. It's also looking what's available to us and mixing it in a way that serves a larger purpose or a bigger mission. Awesome.
So that being the case, can you share with our audience the missed opportunity? Just one example. What's one example of a possible innovation that the church probably missed, other than the widespread broadcast of what you normally do on a given Sunday anyway? What's one example of innovation that we could have tapped into?
All right. That's a great question. So I'll give you an example of innovation that happened in Europe, and it wasn't innovation that was pushed by the church. But, in Germany, they had a huge influx of refugees about 7-8 years ago. And they had so many refugees there. Part of it due to the war in Syria, part of it was immigrate. It was just a lot of people coming, a lot of them from North Africa and the Middle East into Germany. And they didn't have places to put these people. They literally did not have structures, and the government could not provide places for these people. And so an innovator thought, well, in every home in Germany, they've had a declining population in the majority population. There are homes that have extra bedrooms and living spaces. And so they created a small little app. It allowed people to go in and say, listen, I have a house. It's got two empty bedrooms. I could handle for a temporary time of 6 weeks, a family of 3. And they created the other side of the app, which is allowing the refugees to search for opportunities where they might live. And they brought these two groups together in a very innovative, decentralized way that cost very little money. Now imagine if in the United States, instead of putting all these families in detention centers, we had a way to link up Christians that were willing to make space in their homes available to these immigrant or refugee families coming in. Our influence and our ability to love and minister to those people would have been exponentially increased. We missed that opportunity. Instead, we're looking to the government to supply them with housing, and we wring our hands about how these families are being separated and how they're not being kept together. And yet for us, it was a missed opportunity. We didn't innovate in a way to love on those people.
Ted, doesn't that fit right into that term that you use, ecosystem? That example that you just give, if the ecosystem was in operation, then maybe we would have been more open to those innovative opportunities. Unpacks, share with our audience that just as you did an awesome job defining innovation, define ecosystem for us, because I believe I know where you're going with this, but share what I'm familiar with ecosystem, but ecosystem, I just believe that if that was in play, then the innovation, that seems to be the missing link.
Yeah.
Innovation. Talk to me about that.
Well, when we think about innovation, we often think about our own thing. So if you're running a small business somewhere, and I talk about innovation, you're thinking about how to innovate inside your business. If you're running a ministry, say you're running an urban ministry that's a food shelf, you're thinking about how to innovate inside that thing.
Yes.
You're a mission agency leader. I work with a lot of missionary agencies that are globally dispersed. They're thinking about innovating in their thing. If you're in a university, a Christian school, a college, a Christian college, we all try to innovate within our space. But many times the greatest innovation is going to come out of system-wide thinking. It's about thinking about all the elements that are out there that contribute to change in innovation. And the word ecosystem is my attempt to capture the idea that the church, when we talk about the church, now I'm using the word church with a small c here, we're talking about all the resources available to us in the kingdom as it sits today on the face of the earth. And so it might be a Christian podcaster like Dr. Ray Charles. It might be a Christian school or university, a kingdom business, a church, etc. If we start thinking innovatively across those different areas,
come on now,
then we can see some serious breakthroughs. And let me just say that one of the things that concerns me about the U.S. church right now is we have I call it a thin discipleship happening. Take for example a missionary agency. So a missionary agency wants to send missionaries overseas. For them to do that, they need to come into contact with mature disciples that are ready to move into hostile environments to share Christ. But they're dependent on the church to produce those mature disciples. It's almost like they're the wolf in an ecosystem. If the ecosystem is unhealthy down in the the more decentralized parts of the ecosystem, the wolf can't survive because it doesn't have food to live on.
Right.
And similarly, in the church, if we want to see a global movement of missionaries go out across the church, we need churches to be producing healthy disciples. The church needs families to be producing healthy young children. It's all a combined system, and we need to see health across the ecosystem. And that should force us to think beyond the little thing that we're involved in, the ministry that we're involved in, and be concerned about the health of the whole system. So that's what I mean by ecosystem. And again, innovation breakthrough can happen when we think above and beyond the thing that we're thinking about, and our mission and our vision is broader than that.
Ted, as I listened to you, we all heard the sad news of the assassination of the president of Haiti.
Yep.
A few days ago. And if that news just falls on your shoulder and you just shrug it off, that just says you are not part of the Eccleo system. You know, what I hear you saying, this is what I'm imagining as I hear you speak. I am imagining an interdependent, living, breathing organism. Am I hearing you correctly?
That's absolutely what it is. That's right.
Oh my goodness.
Again, the church, small C church, not the local church, although the local church is part of it. Jesus uses the kingdom metaphor, and we need to see ourselves as part of this very large body of believers. And we need to understand that if there's hurt and there's pain expressed in any part of that system. And the other thing, and you kind of allude to this, we're integrated with more than just the church. And we have a stake in what happens in more than just the church. We care about what happens politically. We care about what happens in the social sector that's apart from the church. All of those things are things that we should be trying to make a positive contribution and impact in. And unfortunately, you might have heard about the modernist fundamentalist controversy of the last century. In many ways, the church has disengaged from culture and society, and we're reaping some of the fruits of that. But we really need to be engaging in a much deeper way, locally in our communities, in our cities, nationally, and you talk about internationally. We should be grieving about what's happening in places like Haiti. Wow. I'm very aware right now that in India, COVID is potentially at its worst point ever. Or in Kenya, it's at its worst point ever. Here we are, we're healing up. We're kind of getting back to business as usual. But that is not the case for the leaders that are struggling with COVID in these other parts of the world. And if we're part of the Eccleo system, we should really be caring and praying and concerned about what's happening in those places where our brothers and sisters in Christ are really struggling to serve well in the midst of a huge crisis there.
Wow. Ted, I can't wait as we get ready to wrap up. I can't wait to just give you the mic to share some more about the book. But before we do that, can you share, now that our audience is very aware of who, not what, but who the Eccleo system is, what's the role of righteous leadership in that system?
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Wow. I mean, leaders set mission, and they set future vision and where an organization needs to go. And I would say the foundational principle that I lay forth in this book about innovation is that the tighter we wrap our organizations, whether they're ministries or businesses, around a sense of mission, the more likely it is we're going to innovate. Many of us get trapped in this idea that our job as leaders is to perpetuate our business or organization into the future. Now, there is a sense of stewardship in our leadership, and we would be foolish not to understand that stewarding our leadership, our righteous leadership into the future isn't important, because that is part of leadership. But our organizations are built for a purpose. And what we should be thinking about is how we elevate that purpose so highly that we have to innovate in order to fulfill the mission that we feel God has given us as leaders. And the more that we can be emphasizing mission and moving toward a preferred future, which is what vision is, the more likely it is that we are going to scramble to innovate and scramble to come up with solutions that fulfill that mission. And that's really the role of leadership. setting that mission, setting that preferred future in front of people to rally them in such a compelling way that they're really ready to do just about anything to make that happen.
It reminds me of, I did a teaching a couple years ago on the difference between leader development and leadership development. And most of the books out here that's talking about leadership development is really talking about leader development. Yeah. And as I listen to you, Ted, I love what you said, fulfilling the mission, fulfilling the vision that God has mandated for us, that he put us to steward over. That's righteous leadership because it's coming from the Father. It's coming from the Almighty God. And so sometimes even myself, the host of righteous leadership, even myself, sometimes when I talk about righteous leadership, I may find myself talking more about leader development as opposed to leadership development, which is what it's tapping into that ecosystem. It's tapping into that innovation. It's fulfilling the call from the Father. It's fulfilling that Ephesians 1:17, that the eyes of our understanding will be enlightened so that we can fill the hope of not our calling, but the hope of his calling. Talk to me about that.
Let me just tell you a quick story here as we finish up about purpose, and about why we have created organizations, again, whether they're businesses or churches or ministries. Okay, why do they exist? This little story, I think it kind of illustrates that. I got a kind of a crazy neighbor. He's a really fun guy, and he loves to go deep sea fishing. And he invites me to go with him, and I've gone with him a number of times, and he is a nut for fishing. And one day we were out there and we caught nothing all day long. We're heading back in, and we get by this huge 2-story tall, metal buoy that's out there bouncing in the waves. And that day it was very wavy, and I was almost a little bit seasick. And he sees a large fish swimming around that buoy, which they do to catch little fish that are hiding out under that buoy. He says, "Hey, let's go over there and let's try to catch this thing." And so, he knows what he's doing. He's putting on a particular lure, and he's got me driving the boat. And we get over close to this thing. It's about a 20-foot deep sea fishing boat that he's got. And he's telling me to drive it, which I don't like doing because I'm not used to doing that kind of thing. I'm no expert in that. And he says, "Hey, get me right up to the buoy." And so I get the boat right up to as close as I thought was to the buoy. It was like 10 or 12 feet. Now you got to realize that buoy is bucking in and out of the water, 6-7 feet. We're in these waves and everything's moving, and I'm trying to keep the boat away. And he turns around and goes, "Get closer." And he's standing on the front of the boat, almost falling off every time these waves hit. And I keep backing off because I'm afraid we're going to hit it. And he turns around and goes, "Ted, get closer." And so I get in. Now I'm like 5-6 feet in, and then I back off because I'm afraid we're going to hit. And he just turns around and says, "Hey, can you get closer?" And I said, "Dude, I'm going to hit that buoy with this boat." And he looks at me and he says, "Ted, the boat is for fishing. I'm fishing. All right? That's why the boat's here. Get closer. Don't worry about the boat." And that to me is a little example about how, I look at something like a big, expensive deep sea fishing boat, and I'm afraid of driving that toward the purpose that it's for. But because he is so intent on catching fish, the boat is secondary to him.
Right.
And sometimes if let's say we're leading a church out there, we're not leading that church just to keep the doors open. We're leading that church for a mission and for a purpose. And we should be willing to risk it to see that mission and purpose fulfilled. And that kind of sense of purpose for fulfillment is what leadership is really about. And it should drive us toward taking the kind of risks we might not otherwise take and innovate as we do it.
Ted, I'm gonna squeeze one more question because I thought we were at the end, but I gotta squeeze this question because I want our audience to sort of picture your book as I pass the mic. Can you just highlight one character that you highlight in your book that epitomize or personify what this book is all about. Can you highlight one modern day leader?
One modern day leader.
Yeah.
All right. One of the stories that I'll tell you in the book is about a guy. His name's James Shelley. He runs a ministry in Canada called Faith Tech, and they were trying to figure out how they could innovate. Now this is a young organization, a lot of young leaders, and they heard that one of the top Google searches was for the phrase, "How do I kill myself?" And they were thinking to themselves, how could we as Christians insert ourselves into somebody's thought process when they're Googling the term, "How do I kill myself?"
Wow.
What they came up with was, now let me just stop and pause. How would you solve that? How would you get yourself inserted into somebody's thought pattern as they're trying to research how to kill yourself? Well, what they came up with was they went out and they reserved the domain name, "How do I kill myself?"
Oh my goodness.
And they positioned that website with the search engine optimization keywords, "How do I kill myself?" so that they are the number one hit when somebody types that into the Google search engine. And then they created a web page that has resources and a hotline in a way for people struggling with suicidal thoughts immediately take action to get in touch with a Christian who can counsel them about how God loves them and has a plan for their life. That to me is a great example of how to innovate in our current day and age to provide somebody with redemptive counseling right when they need it and right when they're searching for that kind of assistance and help.
Ted, I have chills just listening to you because I don't have the statistics before me, but I've heard on several talk radio that the number one suicide rate during COVID has been our youth.
Yeah.
So how can the church innovate and utilize that statistic? And that was a classic example. So I'm thankful to you for sharing that example, and to our listening audience, as you're hearing this podcast, you have just received a glimpse, and I'm about to turn the mic over to Ted to just share with you some more about this book. I want everyone to get a copy of this, because this book can literally transform our mindset. We talk about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. This book is all about the growth mindset. So Ted, tell us more about the book. When can we expect it? When is it coming out? What platform can we expect it? Is there a URL?
Yep.
I'm gonna give you the next 3-4 minutes or so just to talk about the book.
All right, so again, the title of the book is The Innovation Crisis. There's a website. You can go to theinnovationcrisis.org or .com, and it's actually both. And I would say it's available on Amazon starting August 3rd. It's already available for pre-order. I would highlight, one of the chapters in the book has what I call an innovation taxonomy for ministry leadership. And what I think a lot of leaders struggle with is framing innovation opportunities in their own context. And so in chapter 7, I provide a layout of 9 different ways that you can think about your righteous leadership using an innovation paradigm. One of the things that I hope happens with this book is that it won't just be a singular leader that reads it, but that a leadership team might consider reading it together. And there's discussion questions at the end of every chapter. And I would hope that leadership teams together would read this book and think about ways that they could really wrap themselves tighter around their mission and vision in a way that forces them to innovate. Wow. So that's my little plug. I hope you get it. I hope you enjoy it. And it was fun to write, and I think it'll be fun for you to read.
Yeah, the last thing I want to share is as an executive coach, I want to let you know that one of the most modern day innovation is group coaching and team coaching. Now, the one-on-one executive coaching that's been around for about 30 years. It's one of the youngest field. But today, 2021, going into 2022, more and more companies are realizing that, man, we need to so almost democratize coaching, where it's not just limited to the executive suite. And so more companies are more engaged in group coaching. What I hear you saying is that this book can be a great tool for cohorts to do some group coaching. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I would say that cohort idea that you're talking about is something we've embraced at Missio Nexus as well. And we do leadership cohorts because we find them to be far better than the one-on-one. Now, they're not necessarily in opposition to one-on-one coaching. The best model is when you have some one-on-one coaching, but then you also have the cohort piece together. At least that's what we found. And again, when it comes to innovate, one of the big principles for innovation is that innovation often comes from outside the sector that you're working in. And in the book, I have a example of a hospital system here in Orlando, and they have an innovation lab. With a friend I have a friend that runs an innovation lab in a ministry, and he went and interviewed this hospital system. And one of the comments that really struck him was the hospital innovation lab said that they don't think that the biggest breakthroughs in medical innovation are going to come from the medical industry. They're going to come from outside the medical industry. And here is where cohort leadership development can be really powerful, because when you get a cohort together, you're mixing ideas from outside of your daily exposure to leadership and innovation ideas. So I'm fully on board with you that these cohort ideas are really great. Wow.
Well, Ted, I'm sure this is part one. After August 3rd, we'll definitely have to get you back on the Righteous Leadership Podcast. You've been listening to the Righteous Leadership Podcast. Our commitment is to bring thought leaders and innovators like a Ted Esler to expand our paradigm so that we can fulfill the call upon us. One of the definitions for coaching that I love to just close this podcast with is that coaching is an ongoing intentional conversation that empowers an individual or group to fulfill the call of God upon their lives. That is what the Righteous Leadership Podcast is all about. It is really a form of innovation. It's not a one-on-one coaching, but as you listen to the Righteous Leadership Podcast, we hope that you will be empowered and that you were empowered through this episode with Ted Esler, so that you can be empowered to fulfill the call of God on your life. If you have been blessed by this particular episode, please share it on Instagram, share it on Facebook, Twitter, etc. And again, subscribe to our podcast on arrayoflight.com and just spread the word. Until we meet again, see you on another episode of the Righteous Leadership Podcast. God bless you. Wow. I tell you, Ted, that was amazing. What do you think?
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much for having me on. I mean, anytime I can get the word out, it helps.